A native widow begged to save her dying child, but no one helped, until a drifting gunslinger stopped at an abandoned clinic. The wind howled through the half-burnt timbers of Stone Tree's shuttered clinic. Snow fell in bitter gusts, whitening the long-dead town. Beside the locked doors, a woman knelt barefoot in the snow, her arms wrapped around a limp child. Her voice cracked with each plea, but the townsfolk who passed, faces hidden behind scarves and judgment, didn't slow. "Mama, I'm cold," the boy had whispered hours earlier. Now he said nothing. No doctor remained. No help came. Just silence. And then, the sound of hoofbeats. A lone rider appeared out of the storm, cloaked in dust and regret. He looked down at the woman, then past her, to the clinic's rotted sign swinging in the wind. He dismounted without a word. In a land where mercy had a price, and a dying child wasn't worth the risk, something had shifted. Let's listen to their story. She didn't see his face at first, only the coat, worn to threads, and the way he moved like someone who carried too much in his bones. The woman looked up as the rider stepped past her and her child, straight to the locked door of the clinic. "It's closed," she said hoarsely. "There's nothing left in there." He didn't answer, just leaned a shoulder into the old wood until it cracked. Snow tumbled into the darkness. The smell of dust and old medicine floated out like a memory no one had dared open. He crouched beside the child without asking. His hands were cold but steady as he pressed 2 fingers to the boy's throat. Still alive. Barely. "Boiling water," he said. His voice was low and rough, like it hadn't been used in days, maybe weeks. She blinked. There's no stove here." He turned to look at her then, eyes sharp, a faded scar just below the left one. "There will be," he said. "Find it. Or he dies." Something in his voice cut through the numbness. She stood, knees trembling, and vanished into the snow. Inside, the clinic was a ruin. Dust cloaked every surface. Drawers had been emptied long ago. Windows shattered. Bottles stolen or smashed. Still, he moved like a man who knew the place, or one like it. He found a cot, tilted against the wall, and righted it. Laid the boy down gently. His breathing was shallow. Footsteps returned. She held a dented kettle and a bundle of twigs. "I saw smoke earlier," she said. "Behind the old mill." He took the bundle wordlessly and built a fire in the hearth with practiced efficiency. Soon the room glowed with warmth and flickering light. She hovered nearby, shivering. "Why are you helping?" He didn't look up. "Kid needs help. That's not what men usually say out here." He let out a dry sound, half laugh, half cough. "I'm not most men." He pulled a stained leather satchel from his saddlebag. Inside were rusted tools, cloth bandages, a bottle of clear liquid that caught the firelight like a diamond. She stared. "You're a doctor?" "I was something once." She knelt beside the boy, stroked his hair. "His name's Toma. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." He gave a small nod. "Fever's high. Could be an infection. Maybe worse." His hands moved with care. A small blade sliced through the boy's coat sleeve, swollen red skin beneath. The man cursed softly. "Did this come from a cut?" She nodded. He scraped his arm trying to catch a rabbit. I didn't think it was deep." He didn't reply, just worked. Cleaned the wound. Dressed it. Gave the boy a few drops of something bitter-tasting. Toma stirred, but didn't wake. When it was done, he finally sat back. His face was pale, sweating. "You shouldn't have brought him here," he said. "There's nowhere else." He stared into the fire. "I know." Outside, the storm deepened. Snow buried hoofprints and swallowed the edges of buildings. The town of Stone Tree had once been proud, prosperous even. But ever since the silver dried up and the doctor was found dead in his chair, folks said the clinic was cursed. No one had entered in years. She only came because she had no choice. The stranger poured 2 tin cups of boiled water and handed one to her. She hesitated. "What's your name?" she asked. He took a long sip before answering. "Used to be Caleb." "Used to be." He didn't answer. They sat in silence as the fire popped. "I'm Nayeli," she offered. "My husband. He was Apache. They called him Hawk. He died last winter." Caleb gave a slow nod. "I'm sorry." She studied his hands, the way they curled slightly when still. Not just a fighter. He'd held life in those hands, and lost it too. She didn't ask what he'd done before, or what had made him leave it behind. She could see it in the way he didn't meet her eyes. As the hours passed, the boy's breathing steadied. Color returned to his cheeks. She watched him sleep, brushing melting flakes from his dark hair. "You saved him," she whispered. Caleb shook his head. "Not yet." But she saw the way he sat straighter, just for a moment, like hope had slipped past his guard before he could stop it. Nayeli leaned closer to the fire, wrapped in a blanket Caleb had given her. "This town. They looked at us like ghosts." He looked toward the broken door. "They're not wrong." The fire had burned low by dawn, but Caleb hadn't slept. He sat with his back against the clinic wall, knees bent, hat pulled low. The occasional creak of timber or muffled cough from Toma were the only sounds in the quiet ruin. Nayeli had drifted off beside her son, curled around him like a barrier against the world. Caleb's eyes, though heavy, never closed. He watched the snow fade into gray light through the broken window, watched the boy breathe, watched Nayeli dream. Her hand had brushed his wrist earlier, felt the scar. He knew she hadn't meant to, but it still rattled him. Few had ever seen it. Fewer still had lived long enough to ask about it. He tugged his sleeve down. When Nayeli stirred, the light had turned blue. She blinked slowly, as though uncertain if the night before had been real. "He's cooler," she said, voice hushed. She pressed her lips to Toma's forehead. "It's better." Caleb only nodded, pouring boiled water into a tin cup for her. The routine, silent, efficient, was how he kept his past at bay. "You didn't sleep?" "I never do." She sat upright. "Nightmares?" "No." He took a long sip. "Memories." She didn't push. Not yet. Instead, she asked, "How did you know what to do? With the infection?" He hesitated, then stood, walked to the cabinet behind the exam table and pulled open a drawer. It squeaked like it hadn't moved in years. Inside, dried herbs, a rusted scalpel, and an old journal, its leather cracked, pages stained. He handed it to her. "My brother's," he said. "He was a field surgeon during the war. Taught me everything he could before." He trailed off. Nayeli opened the book. Neat script filled the pages. Sketches of wounds, fever charts, remedies, some in Latin, some with blood smudges. "This is worth something," she whispered. Caleb looked away. "Not to most." Later. When the wind died and sunlight broke through the clinic's cracks, Caleb stepped outside. Stone Tree was still and brittle. Snow coated the old saloon, the smithy, and the steeple that leaned east like a drunk who'd lost his last bet. A few townsfolk peeked from behind curtains. One man, bold enough, spat near Caleb's boot before walking off. He said nothing. He'd seen that look before, in Virginia, in New Mexico, in every place where skin and silence marked a man as guilty. Not that they knew what he'd done. Not really. But they knew enough to fear a man who arrived with nothing and carried a gun worn smooth. Inside, Nayeli was changing the boy's cloths. She looked up when he entered, her eyes not suspicious, but curious. "I saw you flinch," she said quietly. "When I touched that scar." Caleb froze halfway to his saddlebag. "You don't have to tell me. I just noticed." He sat down slowly, rubbing the edge of his boot into the dusty floor. "I was 15 when I got it. Union Scout caught me stealing morphine from a supply tent." Her eyebrows rose. "Were you a soldier?" "Not exactly." He glanced at the fire, ran messages between lines, carried water, buried the dead. "Then why steal morphine?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "My brother had been shot. I was trying to keep him alive." Nayeli sat back. "Did it work?" "For 2 more days." Silence lingered like smoke, but it wasn't a sharp silence. It was soft, earned. She understood what loss sounded like when it was finally given a voice. "After a while," she said, "my husband was killed by a patrol last winter. Said they mistook him for a scout. They didn't even bury him." Caleb's jaw tensed. "I buried him myself," she went on, voice even. Toma watched. He didn't cry. He just helped dig. They looked at each other then, not as strangers, as people who had buried the better parts of themselves. Midday came quietly. Toma woke for a few moments, enough to sip broth, squeeze his mother's hand, and drift back to sleep. His skin was no longer burning. "He's a fighter," Caleb said. "He gets that from his father." "And his mother." Nayeli smiled faintly, eyes glistening. As the sun crept west, Caleb took to fixing the shutters. Quiet work, steadying work. He hadn't stayed in one place this long in months, maybe years. Nayeli brought him an old hammer from the back room. "You're good with your hands," she said. He chuckled. "For someone who destroys things." "Yeah. You didn't destroy anything today." He paused, then looked down at the scar on his wrist. "No," he admitted. "I didn't." That night, just after they laid Toma down again, Caleb sat near the door with his rifle across his knees. He stared into the darkened street like it might rise against them. Nayeli approached quietly. "You expecting trouble?" "Always." She stood beside him. "From the town?" "No. Not them. The kind of trouble that follows you, even when you ride hard to outrun it." She nodded slowly. "Then I hope we're far enough from wherever you came from." He gave a tired smile. "I don't think I ever left." The next morning, the snow had stopped, but a heavier stillness settled over the clinic. Caleb sat sharpening his knife by the hearth, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone, the only sound beside Toma's steady breath. The boy slept deeper now, his fever having broken sometime before dawn. Nayeli, meanwhile, sat by the front table, flipping slowly through the worn leather journal. "Something wrong?" Caleb asked, not looking up. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers hovered over a torn page, the edges blackened as if it had been scorched or clawed at in rage. At the top of the page, a date, June 3rd, 1868. Below it, a sentence scratched out in thick ink, but not completely. She read aloud, voice low. "Refused to let the girl go. Said he could still fix her. But there was too much blood, too much screaming. The townspeople started pounding on the door. I didn't know what to do." She looked up. "Do you know anything about that day?" Caleb paused. His knife slowed. He finally set it down. "No," he said, but the word didn't sound sure. Later that day, while Caleb tended to Toma, Nayeli stepped outside. The snow had begun to melt, revealing warped wood, broken fence rails, and sunken gravestones behind the church. Everything looked tired, like the town had been holding its breath too long. She made her way to the general store. It was still open, though barely. A crooked sign swung in the breeze, and inside, a woman in her 60s sat behind the counter like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Nayeli approached. "Do you remember what happened here?" she asked. "At the clinic, years ago?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "You mean the girl?" Nayeli nodded slowly. The woman's mouth tightened. "Her name was Miriam, just 16. Fell from her horse during a thunderstorm. Bad break. But the worst was the bleeding. Doc said he could fix it. Kept her inside for hours." She leaned in. "Folks say he wouldn't let the mother in." She screamed, banged on the doors. Then the screaming inside stopped. The doc came out with blood all over his coat and said he'd done all he could. "Did anyone see the body?" "No one ever did." The woman tapped the counter. Next morning, he was dead, hung from the rafters in the clinic. No note, just his bag and a broken bottle of laudanum by his feet. Nayeli shivered. "They say she haunts the place. Folks see her shadow, hear the sobbing. That's why it stayed locked. That's why nobody's been willing to reopen it, until now." When Nayeli returned to the clinic, she found Caleb standing outside, staring at the sign above the door. He spoke before she reached him. "I think I've been here before," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Not here exactly, but somewhere like it. Back when my brother was still alive." He turned toward her. "We were run out of a town in Nevada after we saved a child from dying. They didn't like that the mother was Mescalero Apache." A pause. "They said we should have let the child die, that we were playing God. And your brother?" He kept going. Said people were afraid of mercy because it demanded they look at themselves. Nayeli looked at the sign. Stone Tree Clinic. Letters faded by years of wind and silence. He was right. That night, Toma stirred. Caleb leaned over him, wiping sweat from his brow. The boy blinked up at him, eyes cloudy but aware. "You're the man who brought the fire," Toma whispered. Caleb froze. "What fire?" "The one in the dark. Mama said no one could help me, but I heard you before I saw you." Caleb swallowed hard. "You're gonna be all right, kid." Toma's fingers tightened around his. "Promise?" Caleb looked at Nayeli, then back at the boy. "Yeah, I promise. Later. By firelight." Nayeli approached Caleb with the journal. "You lied to me," she said. He looked up, startled. She held up the scorched page. "This town is the one from the journal. You knew, maybe not at first, but something's coming back to you now." He stood slowly, eyes shadowed. "I was here. Years ago. Just a boy. My brother passed through, stopped to rest. He was the one who helped deliver Miriam that night." He ran a hand through his hair, but he left before the bleeding started. "I stayed behind, hiding in the storeroom. I remember the screaming. I remember someone pounding on the door. Then, silence." Nayeli's voice shook. "You saw what happened?" "No." His jaw clenched. "But I saw the doctor later, on the floor. I ran before anyone found me." She stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because this place is cursed," he whispered. "Not by ghosts, by silence, by what we let happen and pretend we didn't see." Just then, a noise outside. Hoofbeats. They looked at each other. Caleb moved first, grabbing his rifle and stepping to the window. A group of riders had appeared on the main street. 5, maybe 6 men, all armed. One wore a red bandana tied around his coat like a sash. Nayeli's eyes widened. "I've seen them before," she said. "Last fall. They stole supplies from a rail camp, beat the foreman half to death." Caleb's grip tightened. They were patients here once. Gang used to come through with busted ribs and bullet wounds. Doctor stitched them up for cash. He turned toward her. They'll recognize me. She frowned. You knew them. They were part of the reason I left everything behind. The riders didn't approach immediately. They lingered just beyond the center of town, tethering horses and lighting a small fire outside the old saloon, like wolves deciding whether to test a new scent on the wind. Caleb stood watch at the window as dusk fell, rifle slung across his shoulder, jaw clenched like stone. They're waiting, he murmured. For what? Niley asked, arms folded tight across her chest. For dark, he said. Or for me to come out. She stepped beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his tense frame. Why would they care about you? He didn't answer right away, just watched the silhouettes flicker behind firelight, the low hum of voices carried on the breeze. Because I know what they did, he finally said, and they know I'm not dead. That night, the wind rose again, not a storm, but a low moaning breath that curled beneath the clinic's eaves and whispered through cracks in the walls. The wind carried old memories and unsettled ones. It sounded like the voices of people left behind. Toma stirred in his sleep, murmuring things only half-formed. Caleb knelt to check his pulse. Still weak, but holding. Fever retreating. He won't survive a move, Caleb said. If they come in shooting. They won't, Nayeli said quickly, firmly. He looked up. You sound sure. I've lived too long by fear. It doesn't keep them away. It only kills slower. Her hand brushed his shoulder before she stood and moved to the fireplace. Caleb lingered near the boy a while longer, adjusting the blanket, wiping sweat from his brow. Then he crossed the room and sat by the fire. The shadows danced across the walls like old memories, and the clinic felt, for a moment, almost alive again. Niley handed him a tin cup. Not water, stronger. The smell of it made his throat twitch. Where'd you get this? Bottom of the storeroom, behind old bandages. I think the doctor had his own stash. Caleb took a slow sip, wincing. Burns like truth. She smiled faintly, watching the flames. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the crackle. Somewhere outside, a horse stomped restlessly, metal bit jangling faintly in the dark. Tell me about your brother, she said softly. Caleb stared into the fire. Miles was steadier than me. Smarter. He wanted to fix people. Didn't matter what side of the war they were on, or what color their skin was. He thought mercy was the only way out of hell. He swallowed hard. They killed him in a trench outside Vicksburg. A sniper. Right after he saved a Confederate boy, no older than Toma. Nayeli's eyes didn't leave him. Did you ever stop trying to be like him? I tried to forget him, Caleb admitted. Didn't work. Silence stretched. The kind only found between two people who've run out of lies to tell themselves. Nayeli finally spoke. When my husband died, I stopped talking for almost a month. Not even to Toma. I thought if I stayed silent long enough, grief would pass me by. She glanced at Caleb. It doesn't work either. He gave a nod. No, it doesn't. Outside, the fire the riders built flared high. Shadows danced across the upper windows of the clinic. They're watchin', Caleb muttered. Let them. Her voice was iron. He turned to look at her. You're not afraid of dying, are you? I've done it once already, she said. The night they shot Hawk. I died too. This. She gestured to herself. The room. The sleeping boy. This is just the part where I'm still breathing. Something in Caleb's chest stirred. It wasn't desire. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She'd felt what he'd felt. lived through the cold that comes when your soul steps out of your skin and forgets the way back in. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold, but steady. The fire caught in her eyes like gold. Later, as the flames dimmed, Nayeli brought out a small wooden box. Inside, a few folded drawings. Toma's. "This is what he does when I can't find words," she said. "He listens with his hands." She handed one to Caleb, a crude sketch of a man on a horse, standing in front of a burning cabin. Another figure behind the rider, a small child holding a stick. He looked at it in silence. "That's you," Nayeli said quietly. "The fire. The shadow. The boy. He dreamt it before you arrived." Caleb didn't know what to say. The lines were crude, but the expression, the way the boy's stick pointed forward like a sword, felt real, intentional. "Maybe he's stronger than we think. He always has been," she said. As the fire burned lower, Caleb checked the rifle. Loaded. Clean. He sat back at the door, every muscle in his back stiff with waiting. Behind him, Nayeli moved about, quietly, folding blankets, pressing cool cloths to Toma's neck. For the first time, Caleb saw not just the strength in her, but the exhaustion, the weight. He turned his head. "Let me take the next watch," he said. "You already have been." A small smile passed between them, quiet but real. Before sleep came to either of them, Nayeli sat beside him, knees pulled to her chest. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder, not heavy, not possessive. Just there. Caleb didn't move. "I used to believe we were all placed in certain places for a reason," she said. "That we crossed paths with others because the land needed it." He stared ahead. "I used to believe in a lot of things. You don't anymore?" "I think I just forgot how." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. A pendant, woven with beads and sinew, worn from time. She pressed it into his palm. "Hawks gave this to me when Toma was born. It's supposed to keep away what can't be seen." Caleb looked at her, stunned. "Keep it tonight," she said. "Just in case." He stayed awake long after she drifted off, holding the pendant, watching the door. Outside, the fire had died. But he knew something darker would come next. The knock came again, harder this time. 3 sharp raps, followed by silence. Then came the voice, low, rasped, soaked in the kind of mockery that only comes from old scars. "Well, I'll be damned. Caleb Walker, savin' lives again. Didn't think we'd find you hidin' behind a woman's skirts." Caleb stood frozen by the door, breath caught in his chest like a loaded round. The voice punched through time, pulling up faces, blood, and fire from years ago. Nayeli sat upright beside the hearth, hand instinctively reaching for her son. "Who is it?" He didn't answer. Outside, boots crunched the packed snow. The man continued, louder now. "You gonna let us in, Walker? Or you gonna make us knock this whole house down like last time?" That last line, that wasn't meant for anyone but Caleb. He stepped back from the door slowly, rifle gripped tight. His eyes scanned the windows. "They want me," he said. Nayeli was already moving, pulling the shutters closed, placing herself between Toma and the entrance. "Then they're going to have to want harder." Caleb gave a dry, humorless smile. "You always this calm under pressure?" "I'm a mother," she said. Fear stopped being useful a long time ago. Another voice now joined the first, gruffer, older. "We ain't looking for a bloodbath. Caleb, just a word. Man to man." Caleb's jaw clenched. "That's Matthew Burke," he muttered. "The gang leader?" He nodded. "Used to ride with him. Briefly. Back when I thought justice came at the end of a barrel." Nayeli stared. What happened? I left, he said simply. After they torched a village for hiding runaways. Said they were making an example. I walked out mid-fire. Never looked back. You think he did? No, Caleb said darkly. But he remembered anyway. The door creaked suddenly, just a little. Not from force, but from pressure. Someone was leaning against it. We saw your tracks lead in here, Burke said. That clinic's a ghost. Nobody's supposed to be inside. A pause. Unless there's something worth protectin'. Caleb motioned for Nayeli to get down. She didn't move. They'll try to draw you out, she whispered. Don't let them. His eyes locked with hers for one long second. And then, something inside him changed. I won't, he said. Caleb moved toward the door, stopping only to grab something from his coat pocket. He held up the woven pendant Nayeli had given him. You really believe this works? He asked quietly. I believe people carry power, she said. And sometimes, power listens. He nodded once, and then, he opened the door. The morning light was soft, golden, and cold. It poured down the main street in Stone Tree like a slow-moving river, bathing the warped wood and sagging signs in pale fire. 6 men stood outside, all armed, all watching. The one in front, dressed in black with red gloves and a crooked grin, stepped forward. Caleb, Burke said it like a sermon. Been too long. Not long enough, Caleb replied. Burke chuckled. Still got that Walker temper. Thought maybe you found peace out here, playing nursemaid. Caleb's voice was steady. What do you want? Closure, Burke said, grinning. And that book. Caleb's eyes narrowed. What book? Burke tapped his temple. The one your brother kept. The one filled with little secrets. Names, dates, accounts. He wrote everything, didn't he? Even the things we did for coin. He took a step closer. Now I know you carry it. Caleb. I heard it's still in that clinic. Hand it over, and we ride out. No bullets. Caleb said nothing. Burke tilted his head. You'd really risk a kid's life over a bunch of ink? Caleb's face didn't flinch, but inside, something cracked. Walk away, Burke. You're not that man anymore. I am what the world made me, Burke snapped. And if you won't give me the book, I'll burn what's left of this town until it turns to ash again. Behind Caleb, inside the clinic, Nayeli had heard everything. She moved to the storage cabinet, pulled out the journal. She flipped to the middle, where names were listed, codes, transactions. One entry stood out. MB, 6 horses, 4 rifles, raid at San Vicente. Blood money, written in Miles Walker's careful hand. She realized then, the book wasn't just memories, it was a reckoning. Caleb stepped down off the porch, slowly, deliberately. I don't have it, he said. Burke sneered. Liar. I buried it. Years ago, Caleb said, voice flat. Because it was killing me. The things we did, the things you ordered. Burke moved his hand toward his holster. You're gonna regret that. Walker. I already do, Caleb said. The next few seconds happened in a blur. Burke's fingers twitched. Caleb saw it. He moved faster. One shot. Then another. Dust kicked up. Horses neighed. Men shouted. When it cleared, Burke was on the ground, groaning, a bullet in the thigh. The others didn't draw. They stood frozen, staring not at Caleb, but at something behind him. He turned. Nayeli stood in the doorway, holding the journal and a torch. You want it? She called out, voice ringing. Come take it. Burke's men looked at each other, then at Burke. He was crawling now, cursing. Burn it, Caleb said softly. She hesitated, then dropped the torch, The journal lit like dry leaves. Flames caught fast, curling through names, sins, confessions. Burke screamed, not in pain, but in rage, like something sacred had been stolen from him. His men didn't move to help him. They simply watched the fire. One by one, they backed away, mounted their horses, and rode off into the haze. Caleb stood still for a long moment. When he finally looked back at Naeli, the smoke from the burning book swirled between them, gray, gold, and rising like a spirit released. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. "Because the past only owns us if we let it," she said. "And Toma deserves better than men who can't let go." He looked down. The pendant still rested in his palm. Warm now. Alive. The fire from the journal burned out before sunrise. What remained were curled bits of ash and memory, drifting across the clinic floor like gray snow. Caleb swept them into a tin pan and stepped outside to bury them beneath the willow behind the church. He didn't say a word, not even a prayer. Some sins didn't deserve one. Inside. Toma stirred. His cheeks had color now, his breathing steadier. The fever had broken some time before dawn, and with it, something else had begun to loosen in the house, a fear that had lived so long it had made itself furniture. Naeli sat beside him, pressing a warm cloth to his temple, humming something low and ancient, a lullaby from her grandmother's tongue, a song that had outlived wars, treaties, and broken promises. Caleb re-entered quietly. "How is he?" "He spoke this morning," she said. Caleb's brow lifted. "What did he say?" She smiled softly, eyes not leaving her son. "He said he dreamed of a man who rode away from fire." Caleb exhaled through his nose, eyes dropping to the floor. "Sounds familiar." Naeli looked up at him. "He thinks you saved him." "I didn't," he said. "You did." She shook her head. "You stayed. That's more than most ever have." The day passed slowly. Without Burke's men, the silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It felt like a wound had opened, drained, and was beginning to breathe again. Caleb fixed the clinic's back door, reinforced the hinges. Naeli boiled herbs and stitched a new blanket from scraps. Toma drank broth, then asked for a pencil. It wasn't peace, but it was life. Later that afternoon, Caleb found Naeli behind the clinic, carving something into the bark of the willow tree. He stepped closer. "What are you doing?" She didn't stop. "Leaving a mark," she said. "So this place remembers something other than fear." He watched her draw the shape, a circle split by 2 arrows, one pointing north, the other down into the roots. "What does it mean?" She straightened, wiped her hands on her skirt. "It's a promise. One direction for where we came from, and one for where we choose to go." That night, the fire crackled low. Caleb sat by the window, watching the moon drift over the snow-covered roofs of Stone Tree. The town felt different now, not just quieter, but listening somehow. As if waiting for someone to speak first after a long silence, Naeli approached with 2 tin cups. "This time," she said, "it's just tea." He took it with a half-smile. "That's more dangerous than whiskey." They sat together in silence for a time, listening to Toma's soft breaths. The boy slept peacefully for the first time in days, one arm wrapped around a stuffed cloth horse Naeli had sewn long ago. "You'll be leaving soon," she said, not asking, just knowing. He took a sip, let the bitterness settle on his tongue. "I thought so," he admitted. But now, she turned to look at him. "I don't know," he said. "Everything I've ever done. I did running from something. This place, it makes me wonder if I could do something different." She studied his face. What would it take for you to stop running?" He looked at her. The pause was long. Maybe someone to stop with. She reached out, touched his hand lightly. "You think you're too broken, Caleb? But broken things aren't useless. They just hold light differently." He stared at their joined hands. "Do you really believe that?" She nodded. "I do." And she meant it. Later that night, the wind shifted again, but this time, it wasn't sharp or cold. It was soft, like breath. Toma stirred and opened his eyes wide. "Mama." She rushed to him, kneeling beside his bed. "I'm here, baby." He looked around the room, blinking, then spotted Caleb in the doorway. "Are the bad men gone?" Caleb knelt beside him. "Yeah," he said. "They're gone." Toma hesitated, then reached out. Caleb took his hand gently. "I saw you in my dream," the boy whispered. "You had a fire in your chest." Caleb smiled. "Let's hope it stays lit." The next morning, the sun rose over Stone Tree like it hadn't in years. Birds returned. Snow melted from the rooftops. A mother washed clothes behind a rebuilt fence. A little girl placed flowers on the windowsill of the abandoned saloon. Word spread that the gang had vanished, and someone had reopened the clinic. Nayeli stood in the doorway, apron on, sleeves rolled up. Inside, Caleb stacked medicine jars, labeled by hand. He'd found an old set of Miles's notes, formulas, treatments, even drawings, and began restoring the shelves. Toma sat near the stove, sketching again. The drawing this time was simple. 3 figures standing beneath a tree. One held a rifle, one a medicine pouch, one a heart, glowing in his hands. Later, as the afternoon faded, Caleb found Nayeli behind the church again. She was smoothing earth over the place where they buried the ash from the journal. Small flowers had begun to peek through cracks in the snow. He stood next to her in silence. "I've been thinking," he said. "About leaving?" He shook his head. "About staying." She looked at him slowly, carefully. "You sure?" "No," he said, then smiled. "But I'm willing to find out." She reached into her coat and handed him something, a folded page. "What's this?" He opened it. It was the last untouched page from the journal. Blank. "You kept one?" he asked. "I saved it." She smiled. "Fill it with something better." He stared at the page for a long time, then looked up at her. "I think I will." That night, under candlelight, Caleb sat at the clinic desk where his brother once scribbled long into the night. The page rested before him. He picked up the pen and hesitated. Then, in firm strokes, he wrote, "We chose to stay." He folded the paper carefully and slid it behind a jar on the shelf, right above Toma's drawing. Somewhere outside, a lone rider passed by, but didn't stop. And this time, the story wasn't about who left. It was about who remained. The snow had almost melted by the time the rider returned. Not one of Burke's. This one came alone, just before dusk. No flag, no threat, no noise but the steady rhythm of hooves against thawed earth. Caleb saw him first, through the clinic's front window. He didn't move, just watched the figure dismount, tie his reins loosely, and walk forward with something cradled in both hands. Nayeli joined him a moment later. "That's a uniform," she said quietly. "Not a soldier," Caleb murmured. "Too old. Too quiet." The man stopped 6 paces from the door and raised his hands. "I came to return something," he called. "Not to cause trouble." Caleb opened the door and stepped out. They stood face to face in the dying light. The man was tall, gray-bearded, face like carved oak. His coat was worn Union blue, sun-faded and patched with memories. In his hands, a leather-bound satchel. "This belonged to your brother," he said. "Miles Walker." Caleb's breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "Kept it after Vicksburg," the man said. "He'd given it to a boy to hide. That boy died, but I didn't." He looked down. I read every word. Inside, Caleb laid the satchel on the table. It creaked open with the sound of time itself. Inside were drawings, letters, and a journal unlike the one they'd burned. This one was personal. Stories, sketches, hopes, plans for a clinic, rough maps, a ledger of patients treated, regardless of race or allegiance. "I thought it was lost," Caleb whispered. "Maybe it was waiting," Niley said. He turned a page and froze. A name. And a gray feather, treated for fractured ribs, bullet graze, observant, fierce, will survive anything if given reason. Nayeli stepped closer, read it silently. Tears filled her eyes. That night, Toma asked for a story. Caleb hesitated, then pulled up a chair. He didn't speak of Burke, or gunfights, or ghosts. He told the story of two brothers, one who healed, one who wandered, and how, in the end, they found each other in the lives they saved, not the ones they lost. Toma listened with wide eyes, then leaned against Caleb's arm. "You should write that one down," he said. Caleb smiled. "Maybe I will." Days passed. The church bell rang again, not for warning, but for a birth in the northern quarter. The clinic filled with soft noises, the scrape of chairs, the scent of boiled herbs, the rustle of blankets being folded and stacked. Caleb repaired the windows. Nayeli repainted the door. Toma started a new drawing, this one of a bridge stretching between two cliffs, a man and woman meeting in the middle. One evening, as the wind stirred warm dust across the prairie, Caleb and Nayeli walked beyond town, following the old trail leading west. They didn't speak for a long while. Finally, Caleb said, "There's a part of me that's still angry." "Good," Nayeli replied. "That means the wound's still healing." He looked at her, surprised. She smiled. Only the dead stop feeling. They reached the edge of the ridge. Below, the land stretched golden and wide, untouched, waiting. "I used to think I was cursed," Caleb said. "And now, I think I was being led." "To what?" He turned to her. "To here." Back at the clinic, Toma placed his latest sketch in the window. In the center, a fire. Not devouring, not wild, just warm. 3 figures sat beside it, faces lit with something between memory and hope. And behind them, a tree, its roots buried deep, its branches reaching toward stars.